12,000 years ago, a woman was buried with her hand resting on a puppy. Not a tool, not food. Her fingers were curled around its shoulder. Someone loved that animal so much they refused to leave it behind. And nobody taught them to do that. No culture told them to. No religion required it. It just happened. The same way it happens to you. You probably have a photo of your pet on your phone right now. Maybe 2. Maybe 20. And if someone asked you why you love that animal so much, you would struggle to explain it. You just do. It feels natural. Obvious even. Like it was always supposed to be this way. But here is the thing. It was not always this way. There was a moment, somewhere between 15,000 and 40,000 years ago, when a human being formed a bond with an animal that had never existed before in the entire history of life on Earth. Not a working relationship, not a hunting partnership, something stranger, something warmer, a bond that had no survival value anyone could point to, a bond that exists, in some form, in nearly every human culture alive today. This is the story of the first pet. And the real answer to how it happened is far stranger than you think. For most of human prehistory, animals meant one thing: food, or danger, or both. Your ancestors spent hundreds of thousands of years learning to read the signals of wild creatures: the freeze before a predator strikes, the scatter of a herd before a storm. Animals were information. Animals were calories. Animals were threats. The idea of bringing one inside, of feeding it from your own hand, of sleeping near it without a weapon ready, that would have been lunacy. So what changed? The leading theory for decades was that humans domesticated wolves intentionally. That at some point, a clever early human looked at a wolf and thought, I could use that. I could train it, put it to work. The story went that we selected for tameness, reduced aggression, and slowly shaped the wolf into the dog over thousands of years of deliberate breeding. It is a satisfying story. It also appears to be wrong. Brian Hare, an evolutionary anthropologist at Duke University, has spent years studying the cognitive evolution of dogs. What he and his colleagues found flips the whole origin story on its head. Dogs did not become tame because humans bred them to be. Dogs became dogs because the least fearful wolves started hanging around human campsites on their own, drawn by the scraps and waste left behind by hunter-gatherer groups. The wolves that ran away survived. But the wolves that stayed, the ones with a slightly lower fear response, a slightly higher tolerance for human proximity, got more food. They left more offspring. Over generations, those offspring got calmer, more curious, more attuned to the humans they lived near. In other words, dogs domesticated themselves. And what does that mean for you? It means that the animal sitting at your feet right now did not come from a human decision to control nature. It came from a wolf that decided, on its own terms, that you were worth the risk. But the wolf-to-dog story, as remarkable as it is, only explains one animal. How did humans go from tolerating semi-tame wolves at the edges of camp to actively choosing to form bonds with animals? How did the pet relationship begin? The answer may lie not with wolves at all, but with something far smaller and far more surprising. Pat Shipman, a paleoanthropologist at Penn State University, argues in her work on the animal connection that the human relationship with animals is not a byproduct of farming or settlement. It goes back further, much further, into the deep roots of what makes humans human. She proposes that forming relationships with other species is actually a core cognitive adaptation that helped early humans survive. Watching animals, reading their behavior, predicting their movements, These skills trained the same neural circuits that later became language, planning, and complex social bonding. Humans did not start caring about animals in spite of being smart. They became smart, in part, because they cared about animals. That changes the framing entirely. If your ancestors were already wired to track, observe, and mentally model the inner lives of animals, it is not surprising that some of them started bringing young animals back to camp. Not to eat, not to use, but because something in the human brain responded to a young animal the same way it responded to a young child. The trigger is biological. It is called the Kindchenschema, and it was first described by ethologist Konrad Lorenz in 1943. Certain features, large eyes relative to the head, a rounded face, soft features, small nose, trigger an automatic caregiving response in humans. Babies have these features. So do puppies, and cubs, and kittens. When a hunter-gatherer brought home an orphaned wolf pup, or a bear cub, or a fawn, they were not making a strategic decision. They were responding to hardwired caregiving impulses that evolution had already installed for a completely different purpose. The pup looked helpless. The brain said, "Feed it." And so they did. Archaeological evidence supports this. At the site of Ain Malaha, in what is now northern Israel, researchers uncovered a burial dating to around 12,000 years ago. A human skeleton, believed to be that of an elderly woman, was interred with her hand resting on the skeleton of a puppy. Her fingers were curled around the animal's shoulder. This was not food storage. This was not a tool. This was grief. Someone loved that animal enough to bury it with them, to carry it into whatever came next. This is, as far as the record shows, the oldest evidence of a human-pet relationship ever found. And it does not look like the beginning of something strange. It looks like the ending of something already familiar. But dogs were not the only ones. Across archaeological sites from the ancient Near East to the Americas to Southeast Asia, researchers have found evidence of humans keeping animals that had no obvious economic value. Monkeys, foxes, deer, birds, even crocodiles in some Egyptian contexts. Hunter-gatherer groups in South America have a long tradition of raising orphaned animals of dozens of species as what researchers call companion animals. Not pets in the modern sense, but not livestock either. Something in between. Darcy Morey, an archaeologist who has studied human-animal relationships extensively, notes that the word domestication is almost too clinical for what early humans were doing. The relationship was emotional before it was economic. Utility came later. The bond came first. Think about what that means. At some point, a person sitting in the cold, in a world without cities or agriculture or written language, looked at an animal and felt something. Felt responsible for it. Felt affection for it. That feeling was not taught. It was not a social rule. It arose spontaneously from circuits that evolution had built for other purposes. And it was so powerful, so consistent across cultures and across millennia, that it survived every ice age, every migration, every upheaval of human civilization. You carry that same feeling right now. When you see a stray dog on the street and your chest tightens. When you slow down for a bird on the road. When you cannot watch an animal in distress without wanting to help. That is not sentimentality. That is a feature of human cognition so old it predates farming, predates cities, predates written history. Somewhere along the way, probably many times, in many places, across thousands of years, individual humans made the same quiet choice. They brought something wild into their circle of care. They shared their food. They shared their warmth. They gave something vulnerable a name, even if the name was only a sound. And the animal, against all evolutionary logic, stayed. The first pet was not a product of civilization. It was a crack in the wall between species, A moment when a human brain, wired for survival, reached past survival towards something else. Something that felt like belonging. 12,000 years ago, a woman refused to be buried without her hand on that puppy's shoulder. You still feel exactly what she felt. You just keep it on your phone.